Welcome to Revenue Rehab, your one-stop destination for collective solutions to the biggest challenges faced by marketing leaders today. Now head on over to the couch, make yourself comfortable, and get ready to change the way you approach revenue. Leading your recovery is modern marketer, author, speaker, and chief operating officer at Tegrita, Brandi Starr.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Revenue Rehab. I am your host, Brandi Starr, and we have another amazing episode for you today. I am joined by Ellza Malok. Ellza is an award-winning CMO who drives businesses into the future. With a data-driven and strategic mindset, she has led global marketing teams, spearheaded brand transformations, and achieved remarkable results. Her expertise lies in developing innovative strategies, leveraging data science, and captivating audiences through compelling storytelling. She founded BMG, a psychology-based marketing firm that helps brands change hearts and minds through our proprietary approach, the butterfly effect. Welcome to Revenue Rehab, Ellza. Your session begins now.
Thank you so much for having me, Brandi. I'm really excited to be here.
I am excited to talk to you. I know that this is one episode where I'm definitely going to learn some new things, which I absolutely love. But before we jump into that, I like to break the ice with a little woo-saw moment that I call buzzword banishment. So tell me, what industry buzzword would you like to get rid of forever?
You know, I come from the data science side, so this is going to sound a little bit more of an oxymoron, but one word that I do want to banish in the way that it's used is attribution modeling.
Yeah, that one is one that most people don't like. Attribution just tends to not have a great reputation. So why is it that you don't like it?
So I think that a lot of organizations, the way that attribution modeling is used is in a one-to-one relationship, meaning one attribution to one sale. And most data is supposed to be directional, given the fact of data privacy and everything that we can use it with, that it's used as a make or break versus a directional aspect, which is the intended use for a lot of marketing intelligence programs, including attribution modeling.
I like that. Yeah. And that is the common challenge, is that it is, it assumes that a B2B buyer does this one thing and then magically, buys this really expensive other thing. And that's not usually how it works. So now that we've gotten that off our chest, tell me, what brings you to Revenue Rehab today?
I am really excited to be here. As I mentioned, I'm excited to talk more about the heart side of marketing and the emotions that we bring to our audience and what strategies we should use to reach the heart of our audience.
Awesome. And so before we jump in there, I believe in setting intentions. It gives us focus, it gives us purpose, and most important, it gives our audience an understanding of what they should expect from our discussion today. So what is your best hope for our talk? What would you like people to take away from listening to this episode?
I would love for people to take a step back and look at their marketing strategies, whether you're a coordinator all the way up to a CMO or even a CEO that is evaluating how marketing is performing, and just say, are we looking at this from the right lens? Are we looking at it from the heart of the audience, or are we looking at it from the heart of ourselves?
Okay, so I want to jump in directly to that heart piece. We always hear, very common conversation that marketing needs to appeal to the emotion and, really speak to what's the real pain point or the need, not about the features and benefits. That's real common conversation at all levels of marketing. But when you talk about the heart, I sense that that's a little deeper than just we need to appeal to the emotion. So I'd like to really start by giving us your perspective and like, what does that really mean to speak to the heart of the consumer?
So our organization has pretty extensive research, both from second party and our first party data around humans behave emotionally, and they use what they deem as rational or data oriented sources to confirmation bias themselves into their own perceived notions. And you can do one of two things. You can either cry about it and say, well, that's just the way things are, or you can kind of go meet them where they are, connect with them on an emotional basis, and then use your data to confirmation bias themselves into your direction. And there's a way, there's an art to it just as much as there is a science to make that happen. But it does require a lot of internal work within a marketing department to say, are we meeting people where they're at, or are we telling them to follow us along?
Very interesting. So talk a bit more about this, because for me, what I really want to understand is the differentiation between what you're talking about at this, deeper level, and the kinds of conversations that, most of us who have been in marketing for a while have had around, what are they thinking? What are they feeling? What do they need to know? And I know that you've got lots of research and you've got your approach that you leverage for this. So go a little deeper for me in helping me to understand that, what does this really mean for a marketing team? How does this look differently?
I think it starts at the top. So when you're building a marketing strategy, going deeper into the pain points of what does someone experience on a day in, day out with this pain point makes a world of a difference. In some instances, when our organization does CIPs, we actually do character profiles instead of personas, almost as if you're writing a book about that person, because you only understand someone if you walk a mile in their shoes, and this is our mode of it. And by sitting there and saying, oh, okay, this is also the impact, and this is the personal and the business impacts that are occurring from those pain points, you get a much deeper understanding that everything from the way you talk and the way you write about it, all the way down to how your creatives put pieces together, totally shifts. It's it becomes very introspective versus extrospective in many ways, because now your mindset has changed on how you should talk to them because you understand their world.
Okay. And you hit on one thing that I do think is often overlooked that I think is important is the personal impact. A lot of times, especially in B2B, we are thinking about our customer as being the business. And this is why, you have people talk about B2H, that it's business to human, or B2E, business to everyone. That's why these concepts come into play, is that we are a bunch of individuals who collectively have our own motivations. And some of those motivations are personal in how does this impact my career? How does this impact my day to day? How does this change how I'm perceived at work? And those are things that I think are much harder to really put our fingers on. We can make some assumptions. There's no like database, like, a lot of people lean on personas because you can get some of the basics of the demographic and firmographic information. But this level of understanding of what people are thinking and feeling and how they're impacted is something that's not easy to come by. And so how do you, what do you recommend to companies that are like, yeah, it would be great if we could really think about it this way, but how do I get there?
Yeah, so it starts with doing some market research into your core audience. And in most organizations, you're going to have more than one persona. So, prioritizing which personas do you feel would be best beneficial for this type of character profile. And then going down into whether it be focus groups or surveys or whatever mode of research you're going to do, there is kind of a series of questions, and the questions are less important than the way that they're answered. Because the way that they're answered gives you ideas of what biases does this audience particularly have. If you're a tech company and you're selling to maybe a CMO or CTO, there are inherent biases that almost every CTO has. They have a preference on what language they like to use. They have a preference on all of these aspects. So by understanding that world, you become a part of their community and say, oh, okay, now you understand the level of why I have this bias or why I go through it. In some instances, we've even been able to go down as far as to say, well, because we know the demographic is this point, we know that 10, 20 years ago, they were facing this, which is a direct byproduct of their current pain points. So we were even able to lean into some familiarity of their past lives that we were able to subliminally message moving forward to say, oh, I'm going to use that joke or that play because I know that they can relate to it because our demographic just happened to be really tight in some of our projects. So I think once again, I kind of equivalent it back to a book. If you can write a character profile that you can say, okay, here's this person's arc for their story, you get much more personal. And you understand, oh, this is why Jane Doe is doing this, and this is why John Smith is doing Y. You start to understand the whys of their actions, which helps you way farther in everything from strategy development all the way down to content creation, because you know the lens you're looking from. It's sometimes our team calls it a little bit like fan fiction. Like we wrote the book, now we're writing the fiction after that from it, because it does have that element of continuing storylines because we know those characters so well.
Okay. And so I know just from some of the previous information that you had shared with me that there is a direct impact to doing this well coupled with your brand authenticity and how you want to show up in the marketplace. And so I'd like to kind of connect the two in terms of like, how does this change your organization? How does this help you live your brand, or how does it change? What does it change?
Yeah, so we put character profiling, brand authenticity, and neuroscience and psychology research kind of in a triangle. And the three are all, it's a symbiotic relationship between the three. So doing almost the same work to your brand identity will actually get you a deeper sense of who you really are. So similar format, but you just do it introspectively versus identifying others, gets you an idea of, okay, this is who our organization truly is, not who necessarily we want to be, but this is who we are today. And having that level of authenticity to say, here's a little bit of our character flaws, here's the things that we're good at, here's the emotions we convey, whether we want to or not. That level of authenticity and that level of transparency tends to go way further when you couple it, and then even more when you couple it with that character profiling to say, here's who we are, good, bad, indifferent, here's who we are. And here's who our audience is, and here's how we want to talk to them. It resonates significantly further because buyers are, historically have way more access to data than they've ever had before, show a much more higher level of intelligence when it comes to research. We know that 87% of them have basically picked out their top companies that they want to partner with a particular initiative before they even contact the organization. So I always look at it from a perspective of, if everything speaks and we know how they want to be spoken to, they being the target audience. And we know the psychological research, and then we also know how you speak. Now you've got a really interesting effect on the three to say, you know how people behave, you know what these people want to talk, how they want to be communicated to, and then you know who you are. It becomes much more clear when you start everything from strategy to conversion, because you have a more predictable model to say, I can empathize with that behavior.
Okay. And so I want to dig a little bit more because I'm really intrigued about what you're saying in terms of bringing forth the brand's personality, the good, bad, and indifferent. And I love that you phrased it that way, because I know in general, if you look at most marketing material, whether it's websites, collateral, emails, whatever, it focuses on the good. You know, that is what everybody wants to bring forth. Here is why we're great. And the bad, most people want to tuck away, and the indifferent is kind of there and we just don't highlight it. And I do believe, I like to use a lot of dating analogies, and I think about, choosing a company, like looking at, dating profiles and figuring out which way you're going to swipe. It's like something has to come through in terms of who is that person. And in this case, who is that brand? And that transparency, like I think about, the transparency that comes across in someone's dating profile is actually attractive because you recognize they're not putting forth a front. It feels like that's a whole lot harder to do and to get people comfortable with, because, even thinking about how I could write that way, like, yeah, it's not that difficult to, write with transparency. But being able to like get that approved through the various, cycles of, well, we don't want to say that because we're not stellar here, or we don't want to say that because it, paints us in this light. When you're working with your clients, how do you advise them, or what sort of ways are you seeing that people are able to put that level of transparency about who they are as an organization out in the marketplace without, that fear of we got to appear perfect?
I think that in our instance with our clients, the way that we've used it is finding a balance between being transparent and but still showing that they're a very capable organization. And in almost all instances where our clients have potentially refused to go down that route versus the ones that have, are doing, somewhere between 15 and 20% better than the ones that don't. Because there is something to be said about being open to say, if this is your problem, we don't actually do that well. So it's better for us to tell you now than for us to lose you 6 months down the line because we didn't solve your problem. Specifically for B2B, because I think B2C has a slightly different emotional basis and longevity feel. But for the B2B, if you're going to be in a long sales cycle, which is a lot of our clients, you really want to make sure you don't lose them within, a year or so, because it took you a year to gain them. And now, not only, because the other part is we have this post close or customer lost effect, where the moment you lose a customer, they're probably going to tell 10 other people why they lost them. So now you've also lost the opportunity to connect with any of theirs because you've broken their trust by just not being honest in the forefront. And there is a time or place on what levels of transparency at what medium. So you do have to play that dance a little bit. And what we found is the further down the process you go, the more transparent you have to become, because they are also being transparent with you. You're building an emotional capital with them, and you trade vulnerabilities. And that's a really good way to build emotional capital, is they tell you what they're vulnerable with. They tell you their pain points. They tell you what they are looking for. So it's only beneficial for you to say, this is what we do well. These are the things we don't do so well. And if any of those are your deal breakers, then we know now. Versus, spending time and then realizing your close rate is not as great as you'd like it to be because you weren't as transparent. So it's really all about building that emotional capital as you go down the sales funnel as well.
Okay. Yeah. And what I'm hearing is that this approach is really important at both the marketing and, or within the marketing and sales functions, in that we've got to be able to put everything that we're putting out there, have the right level of vulnerability and transparency in it based on where they are. But given that we've got to have more of this further in the process, it's like you've really got to get sales on board, which is counterintuitive to your stereotypical sales motions where, like if I think about sales folks in like the 90s and early 2000s, it very much was a tap dance of like, let me just tell you why we're great. You would never, especially in tech, have a vendor be like, oh, we're not great in this area. Like it was very much close everything, that you can. So it's like that approach has to really be woven into the organization. And I think that ties back to what you were saying in who are you as opposed to who do you aspire to be? Because it's like, if this is who you are, then everybody needs to be able to effectively communicate that.
Exactly. And there is a balance between, what your vision is, right? Say, we want to be this company at some point, but you still have to say, this is where we are, right? You can't, for lack of a better word, you can't turn, a little Chevy Aveo, which is what I used to have when I was in college, to a luxury car. That's not the type of transformation that's feasible in a very short period of time. However, you can say, okay, this is where we are today. Here's our 10-year aspiration, but here's the next step for us. And there's a lot of interesting product-led growth initiatives that can help you with that, where you can steal some of those scenarios in your messaging, even if you're not using a product-led approach in its entirety as well.
Yeah. And, even just thinking about, our business and like there as consultants, we are not the end all to be all. Like we have our places where we shine. We have those places where it's like, yeah, we can do that. That's not our core expertise. And then those like, yeah, we don't touch that. And I can even think of times where I have told a prospect, like, that's not where we are amazing. Like, we're amazing here. We can help you there. We can, collaborate with another vendor to help you there. And they've, I'm thinking of a particular scenario. They didn't sign with us because they wanted a single agency to cover, more swim lanes than we could. But I later got a referral from that person who had referred someone else. And, I didn't think about it then because, hadn't really had this thought process. But now that I'm thinking about it, that transparency of being able to say, here's why here's where we're amazing and probably not for you, because you need one of the deal breaker kind of things using your wording from earlier. I am making an assumption that is probably what led them to refer someone, because they had never worked with us, had, no real true experience other than the sales process. So that's really interesting. And definitely I see a potential outcome there.
Yeah.
So where your clients are really successful, I know you said the ones that really adopt this approach are doing, 25% better. What does that really look like? Like, I always like to focus on, because any sort of transformation within an organization comes with effort.
Mhm.
And so it's like, why do we embark on this effort? And so what are some of the business outcomes that when you really, build that authentic brand, put the emotion, really understand the customer and their character, what does that do for a business?
So there is there's a balance between having intrinsic value built on as well as revenue value built on. And we try to balance the two to say these are long-term projects where the revenue won't come until probably year 3 to 5. And here's the 18 months to 3 years, and then here's the short term. So we do try to balance the two. I would say for our startup, more younger clients, it's the difference between doubling revenue year over year versus the 15 to 20% that they were having previously. If you're a larger organization, that's a much bigger ship to turn. So there's a longer tenure that we have to kind of manage. In some instances where we've taken over maybe entire channels for them, we've seen that really spike quite drastically because of the way that we've come upon it. If we're doing more top level or research, I had one client who came to us and we decided to do all their creative moving forward because that was one area that they really struggled with. In creating emotionally captivating and triggering pieces. And it took us about 3 months to actually start a creative piece because we had to go all the way back. And then we had to meet to a point where we felt comfortable generating content for them. And with that, we ended up doing several proposals on their behalf for this long-term RFP that they're going into. And they have probably a 40% higher close rate than they've had before because of that, just the creative aspect. Nothing else has changed in their organization. In fact, they have less opportunities than they've had before because of, concerns about the economy and so on, but they've been closing way faster and on a much better rate just from the visual perspective. So we try to kind of say, where are the areas we can make impact? Because similar to you, there are things that we don't do. Like we operate on hearts and minds. So technical pieces outside of data science are not really our skill set. So we'll say, here's context that you can go to that we've worked with in the past. But so when we try to carve our pie, we say, this is the area that we think is going to make an impact, because it doesn't really make sense for us to take a piece of a slice if we know that we've compartmentalized this pie so much that we're not going to make a dent.
Right. And so the last thing I want to ask about, I know you have this butterfly effect approach, and I've been dying to know, what is that? So can you kind of give me the summary of what that approach is and why you developed it?
So we've kind of talked about pieces of it. And the way that the butterfly effect works is really those strategic movements that marketing and really any area of an organization moves and how they impact behavior. It's a lot around, if you think about the ripple effect, I drop a stone in the middle of the water and you see the ripples kind of go through. It's that mindset of doing things way earlier and building that emotional capital slowly. A really good scenario is the one that you mentioned, where you told the prospect that this is not what you do, and then later on you got a referral out of it. It's that emotional build that we work through, and our psychology research shows us that this journey is it's way deeper than the funnel. There's a subliminal side that is inherently built, and that's actually what shapes biases and perceptions. So we work on that level as well, and then start from that point all the way down, versus necessarily what's traditionally used as the awareness stage. If you've gotten to the awareness stage, someone's already formed an opinion about you.
Right.
So we want to get to a point where we determine the opinion before the opinion is formed.
Okay. I was going to say, so interesting. I love it. I think probably my favorite part of hosting Revenue Rehab is just the amount that I learn from my guests. So this has been really, really awesome. And talking about our challenges is just the first step, and nothing changes if nothing changes. And so in traditional therapy, the therapist gives the client some homework, But here at Revenue Rehab, we like to flip that on its head and ask you to give us some homework. So for those that are listening, and they're really, what you're saying is really resonating with them in the need to tap more into the emotion of both their company and their target audience. What's the first step? What's your one thing? Where do you recommend people start?
So I think it starts from the internal team. Like if you're investigating this, do a sample within your existing team of how they personally perceive it's going. Because I think that a lot of marketers inherently know there it is, but there may not be tangible data to prove it because they're not measuring at that point. That's a really good stage. In a lot of our clients, we've seen that where their team feels validated with some of the information we've brought through because they may feel it and they see it anecdotally, but they just don't have the business case to bring something forward. I think that's a great first step to say how do we think we're doing? Excluding the numbers, what is our perception of how our clients are behaving, and are we reaching the line? And it's obviously done in a personal, enclosed environment, and creating that space for authenticity within your team, and then go from there. Like understand where things are, if depending on what the feedback is, because sometimes the feedback is we're doing great, but you have to continue to ask.
Right.
Because you may not have an ecosystem of people saying we should change X, Y, and Z, or I think we're doing this wrong. So it's that continuous aspect. And I've had some clients that may not have gotten an answer until 3 months of asking every 2 weeks, because there's just that hesitation of not rocking the boat. And then I've had some where they've been very vocal on day one. So you just don't know what mixed bag you have.
Okay. I love that as a good starting point, because that's an easy next step or first step to just start to talk to your team. Because there probably are things that they are seeing that they're like, oh, we could totally do better here. Or, I feel like I've even seen some things with like some of the brand guidelines and standards. It's like, we do this because this is what, we're told we have to, but really, we feel like this would be, a better voice or whatever. So I do think that that's a great starting point. So now everybody's got their one thing, and that's to talk to your team, and to start to get that insight. Well, I have enjoyed our conversation, Ellza, so much, but that's our time for today. But before we go, how can our audience stay connected with you?
So easiest way to connect with me personally is LinkedIn. My URL is just my first and last name, Ellza Malok. If you want to connect more or just read more insights on the butterfly effect or any of our research, that's available at bluemonarchgroup.com, under the Butterfly Chronicles, where we have insight and tips and so on. And yeah, I think that's a good way. But thank you so much. This has been a lovely conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Well, we will make sure to link to your LinkedIn, as well as BMG. So wherever you are listening or watching this podcast, check the show notes and you'll be able to connect with Ellza. I have thoroughly enjoyed this discussion. You've given me some things to think about. So I really, really appreciate you taking the time to come to the couch today. So I hope everyone has enjoyed my discussion. Can't believe we're already at the end. We will see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Brandi. Take care.
You've been listening to Revenue Rehab with your host, Brandi Starr. Your session is now over, but the learning has just begun. Join our mailing list and catch up on all our shows at revenuerehab.live. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at Revenue Rehab. This concludes this week's session. We'll see you next week.